Headless obviously is the concept of splitting up the user experience layer from the business data and business functionality. And despite the fact the idea we talk about taking it away, actually one of the main reasons to do that is to have multiple different user experiences. So I'm talking about things like a website, a native app, an in-store kiosk, an in-car experience, all of these different things, social commerce, getting access to your product data, being able to buy through things like Instagram, TikTok, and so on. This effectively is leading to what people are calling seamless omnichannel.
Welcome to the Ecommerce Toolbox Expert Perspectives, a podcast by Noibu, where we explore the elite strategies and cutting-edge insights with our expert guests. Get ready to propel your e-commerce business to the next level.
Welcome to another episode of the Ecommerce Toolbox Expert's Perspective. Joining us today, we have a Salesforce and composable commerce expert in James Semple, all the way from the UK. Welcome, James.
Hey, nice to be here. Nice to see you as well.
Likewise. I always like to start off by learning a bit about your current role, but maybe take us on a bit of a journey where you started in your career, in your current role at Salesforce, and what are kind of some of the key roles and responsibilities that you have?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I started really as a programmer, frankly. I came in to IT as a programmer, C programmer, in fact. And I would say, fairly lucky that I just managed to get my first job with Oracle, because that was a kind of rubber stamp on my resume, which in turn means you tend to get better jobs from that. And so I really just got in as a C programmer because I liked that really well-constructed, proper rigor, I guess maybe is the best way to put it, a proper programmer in that sense, right? I come from that background. But then I did get very much involved in web technologies. I came into JavaScript. I went through a bunch of companies, including Computer Associates. I felt I'd lost a bit of the fire, like the fun of what really got me into IT. And then I suddenly found startup companies and I got that fire back, right? So suddenly that kind of gave me, and I liked startup companies because the fact you have a very multifaceted role. You have to fill a lot of shoes, right? You have to do lots of different things simultaneously. And I really liked that. And I worked for a startup company on the West Coast called Appcelerator. So I spent a lot of time with JavaScript. Appcelerator built the technology allowing you to build cross-platform apps. Worked in that world for a while. And then moved on from Appcelerator to Mobify, which was, I believe you've already met some of my colleagues there. So Mobify was a Vancouver-based startup working with initially mobile optimizing websites, and then moving on to really developing front-end as a service for headless environments, which obviously we're going to talk a bit about. Mobify was acquired about 4 years ago by Salesforce. I came in, within Salesforce, I moved into a support role initially, and then it was seen that, my value, because of some of my background, I guess one thing we might want to touch on today is in my time at Mobify, in my 5 years at Mobify, I was a solution engineer, solution architect. And in that time, by complete accident, I ended up at the table when the MACH Alliance was conceived. So I was one of the 5 people at the table when we came up with the idea of creating the MACH Alliance. Mobify became a founding member of the MACH Alliance. I was on the technical council for it. And so that background plus my Mobify background put me in a good position inside Salesforce to work in really helping develop our composable strategy. I think everyone knows that Salesforce as a company wasn't on the cutting edge of composable, initially perhaps a little reluctant. And since the acquisition of Mobify, was a big move in that direction. And they needed composable experts, frankly, and they needed people who could help tell that story, because it's a complex story, and as we're going to sort of dip into today. So my current role, I'm a product management director. I work for the commerce product, the commerce cloud. Informally, I'm often called the composable commerce evangelist for the company globally. And my role really involves working with the sales teams, speaking to customers and prospects, helping to really tell that story. As we're going to see today, it's a complicated story. It's not just like a typical product sale. You're often getting involved with things like architecture, getting involved with individual company strategies and so on like that, and how does this fit and align with that? And then obviously working with partner companies, because it's a solution sale and the partner plays a huge part of that. So lots of things like that, developing enablement, developing marketing, things like that, and spreading the message of composable.
That's awesome. And how do you think your previous experience, you mentioned you started off as a programmer, how's that kind of shaped your career to where you're in your current role now?
That's a great question. I do think a lot of what I do right now is sort of the SE role, solution engineer role, kind of on steroids. I think I needed a technical background. It is still a fairly technical solution. So having that technical background, particularly the architectural background, is really important. When people start saying, how is it going to integrate with this and this and this, you do really need to still be able to keep your head above water. You do still need to be able to understand those things. And you're often looking through technical documents and so on like that, working with other companies' APIs. So understanding that, I don't get the time to do the hands-on thing. I guess it's one area I slightly regret these days. I don't get time to really do a lot of coding myself now, but definitely I think the technical side of it was important. The other aspect of it, if you're good as an SE, one of the best things you can do really is effectively map technical capabilities to business problems. That is, to me, one of the main roles of being a solution engineer. And so a lot of my job, frankly, is talking about subjects that are quite technical, quite complex, and making them relevant and important to people who aren't technical. That's a huge part of my role, to be honest, is explaining those subjects, hopefully in a clear way.
Love it. And why are you so passionate about headless or composable? Obviously, you've been in it for a while. You mentioned you're at the table with the MACH Alliance. So yeah, maybe talk to us a bit about what's driving that passion.
I think commerce is a really, really big part of life, frankly. One of the things I love about doing commerce when you talk about it is you're obviously talking to clients, maybe in retail, who are talking about something that they're offering up as a service. But we're all consumers of commerce. Everyone is a consumer of commerce. And in fact, it's a big part of our life. If you want to take a really big step back, looking at some of the things that were proposed around COVID, people were talking about decentralizing cities and stuff like commercial planning is like a big part of everyone's life. And a lot of that decentralization of cities is down to the way that you would buy goods and they would be, shipped around and something like that. So commerce is a huge part of everyday life. And I think changing that experience, changing the way we interact with that is interesting. And you get to work with some of the biggest brands on the planet. I'm always interested to see what they're trying to do to change that experience. And it's always great to be a part of that and work with these big, successful companies. And even the feisty, innovative startups and stuff like that, working with all these different companies as they make these show new ways of doing something, which we've been doing as a culture for a very, very long time. And it's always really exciting to see all the innovation that comes out through that. And, I'm a big consumer of e-commerce and so on like that myself. So yeah, I think that's it really. It's the fact that it impacts just about everyone you talk to.
One of the key things, so there's obviously a lot of buzz with headless composability. It seems like it's one of the forks you kind of take in the road. You need to decide, hey, are you going down the path of heavily curated customization, or do you want just something very simple and try and let your product speak for yourself? Do you maybe want to talk a bit about how, when you're in these boardrooms, you're helping businesses identify and prioritize their business goals when planning a headless commerce project? Do you start with the KPI and then the answer is headless, or do you start with headless and build back the KPIs?
That is a great question. So generally, I start with the business challenge. Headless is not a magic bullet. I think there's a bit more of an awareness now, but I definitely think there was a period in time where headless was seen as the antidote, the cure, no matter what the problem. It was just like headless. And I don't think I think we've perhaps moved past that a bit now. But yeah, I do think that headless because it's exciting, headless because it's new, headless because everyone's going headless is definitely, if people are saying that to me, I'm like, that's a red flag. So I do try and start with the business cases. A hopefully simple thing that everyone in the audience understands. People like, our site is too slow, we have to go headless. And I look at Google Lighthouse, something like that, and I'm like, your image is in a terrible format. If you do that, you will get such a big improvement straight away that you don't have to go headless, because headless can be a big overhaul. So generally, I will start out with the big business KPIs. I mean, frankly, one of the first things you'll find in these discussions is nobody's actually sat down and identified what their biggest challenges are. Like, where is the biggest opportunity for uplift, the biggest opportunity to either save costs or to see that? Like, it's always nice to talk to a company. And it's funny because they're usually the ones who are very doubtful. They're like, we don't really know what we're doing. We feel like we're behind. And they're the ones who actually have identified everything properly. They're like, our checkout has a huge drop-off rate. And you're like, great, you actually are ahead of the curve, because most of the other people who are just doing this stuff are there's an element of delusion. They're just sort of running at stuff because it's not data-driven decisions, let's say. And so for me, I do start with what is the challenge, and I then try very hard to align with some form of KPIs. So for instance, one of the things I've seen in the past, thankfully not Salesforce projects, but I've seen with other projects where you come in and you're picking up a disaster from something else. And one of the problems was somebody high level, CEO, CDO, something like that, said, we're going headless. And nobody questioned it. And nobody said why or anything like that. And then this guy gets replaced. They leave, whatever, this person gets replaced, sorry. And the new person comes in and they say, well, why are we doing this? Where's the rigor? Where's the oversight? Where's the ROI? Anything? And nobody has anything. It was just like, the other person told us to do it. And so that's the thing. So I always say, just from a sheer, protect your own asses point of view, just get somebody write this down as to like what success actually looks like, get KPIs in place, get some level of actual business, black and white, quantitative numbers that you can just sit down with and say, this is a success if it hits this. And so that can start off as business things. It can start off with uplift, things like that, or reduction in costs. And it can also turn to things like, we want to see page speed improved by 1 second on a blank page load, whatever, anything like that. And just generally get things like that identified. And frankly, once that exercise is undertaken, a lot of other things fall out, to be honest. And it's just having that rigor and doing that due diligence to start off with.
What are some of the most common reasons that you see when it's done correctly, right? You mentioned page speed, you mentioned checkout conversion. What are the top, like, call it 2 to 3 KPIs that people come in and say, hey, for these very specific reasons, we want to implement headless and we think it's going to drive this business outcome?
That is a great question. So, okay. Well, I think maybe let's just take a little bit of a step back and say, what can headless actually do? So, headless obviously is the concept of splitting up the user experience layer from the business data and business functionality. And despite the fact the idea we talk about taking it away, actually, one of the main reasons to do that is to have multiple different user experiences. So, I'm talking about things like a website, a native app, an in-store kiosk, an in-car experience, all of these different things, social commerce, coming into getting access to your product data, being able to buy through things like Instagram, TikTok, and so on. This effectively is leading to what people are calling seamless omnichannel, the ability that no matter where I interact with the brand online, in store, anything like that, physical space, I get the same experience, I get a personalized experience, and I'm able to do all of the same actions and so on like that, see the same products, buy them, and so on like that. And effectively, every interaction I have with the brand becomes more and more relevant. Headless is a huge facilitator of that. You wouldn't be wanting to build completely separate full stacks for each one of those channels. So headless, to my mind, is kind of never going to go away once that it is a goal. And then the other side of composable is that if you think about these kind of experiences, there's commerce things like showing products, checkout, things like that. There is content experiences, there's search services, there's payment services, there are a whole bunch of these, promotions. All of these can be broken down into separate discrete services. And so composable architectures allow you to break those down like that, and they can be supplied by different products, even from different product vendors. So that is all about getting the best in class experience. And if you've ever felt you're kind of stuck to an existing product vendor's roadmap, and I like 90% of what these guys do, but I want this other thing. This is a great example of why composable is a fantastic use case. So firstly, understanding what they actually do well is a good step towards things doing this. So if I see somebody saying we're going to branch out to multiple different channels, we have to, our target demographic is moving to Gen Z, we need to be able to do social, we need to be able to do, that's a good step. I see a lot of people who, like, the previous website was really still built for kind of primarily desktop experience. 80% of the traffic is now mobile. Again, huge potential uplift on that. And obviously, you have to really have a more compelling experience from that point of view. On the other hand, one of the things I think has been generally good, sort of a green flag, as it were, for me, where I think a company's going to be successful is, the right way to say this is to map their ambition with their own technical ability. So this works across the spectrum. You get the company, we have 200 developers internally, and we know what we're going to do, and they have an ambitious project. I work with software companies that sell video games. Those guys have some ambitious projects and they have the skill to do that. At the same time, I also see incredibly successful people at the complete other end of the spectrum, tiny teams, not necessarily that technical, but as such, they keep their ambition limited and they get these really nice MVP architectures where it is composable, stuff like that, but they pick their battles, I think is the right way of doing it. And one of the things we saw with some of the early problematic aspects of going composable is people who went from a single product vendor to this incredibly complex architecture was totally unmanageable, incredibly expensive to build, and customizing everything for the sake of it rather than for any value. So picking your battles and understanding why you're doing this, effectively understanding what composable and headless is actually about. And again, being very pragmatic, I guess, about like where you do this. So I guess picking your battles. And like I say, some companies are set up to be able to be very, very customized. Some other companies aren't. And so they just pick the battles and say, we have an incredibly unique product detail page, it's going to be great. The rest of it, we're going to take fairly, vanilla across that and just brand it ourselves. We don't need to customize checkout or anything like that. I feel like I've kind of gone around the houses a bit there, but I think I've made my point on that.
I think it makes a lot of sense. I think if I'm going to really extract and paraphrase, and let me know if you think I missed the mark on this, but I think if we're going to take the bear case on composable and when it's the wrong time, I think what you flagged is when it's a top-down mandate, there's not a clear business, like a rationale behind it, and there might not even be the infrastructure internally or externally to support it. It's just like, the business might not be doing well, maybe you have a new CDO, and it's like, let's just do this because it's a magic bullet. And to your point, maybe it will be, but it likely won't be. And then on the other front of it is you have a very curated experience. I mean, obviously SSCC is known for being leading for a lot of the high-end luxury. And to your point, and this is part of our thought process as well, if you go to a Cartier store, it's very different than if you go into a 7-Eleven. So having the online experience, nothing against 7-Eleven, but you go there with a different experience in mind. It's built around convenience, quickness, price, speed, whatever. And then the other side, it's luxury experience. So having the same architecture and business online kind of experience for that probably just doesn't make logical sense.
I mean, you're right. Yeah. Although, funnily enough, a lot of convenience stores and supermarkets actually have a great composable experience. But you're right in theory, in concept. You're absolutely right. Like some people just need to spin a store up real quickly. And frankly, they could personalize it to wherever. It will not have a material impact on their business at all. You're absolutely 100% right. If you sell like one product, but it's just like, I want 10 of that product. You don't really need to do that. So you're absolutely right. And, luxury and apparel and a lot of those kind of things, automotive, they really do have a complex buying experience. Everything with high consideration items, anything else complex promotions and stuff like that. So yeah, absolutely, definitely. As I said, it makes material impact. We've seen huge uplift in companies doing this right.
Yeah, maybe you don't need to name the brand, but do you have any anecdotes off the top of your head and kind of where you've seen this done right and kind of what some of the expected business outcomes could be?
Yeah, I mean, I won't name them, but fantastic activewear brand. They did an A/B test. They launched a regional site in the US, moving across from a typical kind of all-in-one solution to a composable storefront, and just the improvement in speed, improvement in just experience, I guess, reduced bounce rate significantly. They didn't improve SEO immediately because they actually did an A/B split test, which was my recommendation. And again, another example of how do you get a very accurate measurement. Year on year has been a difficult one these last few years because we had so many different changes of macroeconomic conditions and global conditions in general. You may remember we had a pandemic, for instance, but those kind of things like that. And that has a big impact. But A/B testing is a good one. So yeah, just from an A/B test, bounce rate went down, page speed load improved, and they did it through the month of December. And actually, I think they stopped the A/B tests 2 weeks in because they just said we're losing money by keeping this going. It's just making so much more money through the composable site. And yeah, it was a huge success. I'm not saying these things aren't without the challenges, but yeah, generally, I would say that was one of the ones that I thought was like one of the best, most clear examples because of the way that they went about doing it, which to their great credit, they did that seriously. I think, frankly, one of the interesting things about this is the kind of shortcut quality where people do shortcut. I think, I was thinking about picking your battles. Doing things like an A/B test is actually very, very powerful just because it's that ability to go back up to upper management, to board, everyone, all the stakeholders and say, hey, look, this is what we proved. It was very successful. You're better off arguably like on your initial build, doing a simpler build and making sure you're spending the time doing things like A/B testing and stuff like that is my opinion. I find things like that sometimes get shortcut and get missed out. And I don't think it's a great idea to do that. So yeah, I think that would be a good example of it. But mobile optimization is a huge deal right now. If you go back to 10 years ago, the percentage of people using mobile phones to buy things was very, very small. Now it's typically from all the companies I talked to, and I talked to hundreds, I'm seeing something like 75 to 80% of customers are on mobile phones, which is, I think it's like you really do have to optimize for that. The funny thing was, I thought was through that COVID, we did not see a slowdown of that migration across the mobile phones. It didn't slow down at all, even though we were home with our laptops and stuff like that. It's become the primary buying device.
And the company that you mentioned sounds like they took maybe more of a gradual versus like a big bang approach. How do you understand if, let's say that you're a brand, you want to do it, what do you recommend? The big bang approach, the gradual approach? Is it really situation dependent? How does that work out?
It absolutely is situation dependent. And even actually within what you're just saying, I have 4 different ways of doing a gradual approach. So the big bang approach often is useful if you have to get off a burning platform. We have got a renewal of this platform that's being discontinued. It's often a good idea to just completely re-platform in that. And if you have a very simple platform as well, we've adopted a technique inside Salesforce. We'll talk about this later. We've adopted a technique of really maximizing this. One of the challenges seen around composable architectures is just the sheer amount of custom code being built. So how much can we pre-build in advance to minimize the amount on a per project basis? We had a success recently last year where we saw a barbecue company move across from a competing platform to us in a full composable build in 3 to 4 months, about $350,000. Like that is not what most people associate with composable builds. So very, very hundreds of thousands, months, not years and not millions, things like that. So very, very popular and powerful way of doing it that way. But for most companies who are fairly entrenched on an existing platform that they're pretty happy with, but they want to improve, there's 4 different ways. So to go back to the company we just talked about, this has been around forever, right? But they just picked a region and they weren't American based. And so America was kind of a good region for them to start with. They didn't have as much market penetration. That's a fairly standard one. Another one is to break the site down itself and start doing it, and so there's 3 different ways we've seen companies do that. One is kind of the most popular one is top of funnel. If I can improve things like the mobile optimization, the speed, all of these kind of features at the top of the funnel, I can generally improve things like SEO for organic traffic. I can improve first page speed load and typically reduce bounce rate as part of that. So if I'm doing things like homepage search results, PLP, PDP, that whole top of the funnel that people spend most of the time, frankly, on the site, we usually see something like improved add to cart ratings, typical higher average order values, things like that. So we see those. So that's one area of doing it. And like I said, the most popular one. Another one is actually to go from the cart first, which is an interesting choice. Many people think, well, the cart is the cart. What at that point, people are committed, but it's not actually true. In some sites we've talked to, surprisingly high drop off of carts. So if you've got a cart that's been optimized for desktop and it's multi-page and stuff like that, it's surprising how moving it to a single page mobile optimized cart can really make a material impact. And we saw a company see a 30% increase in cart conversion just by doing on checkout conversion by just doing that alone. So yeah, top of funnel, bottom of funnel. And then another one is to just add something. We often do this if a company is really skeptical about going composable. It's like, I don't want to have to go through that thing of reversing it back out if we don't like it. So it's to add a feature to the site that doesn't already exist. So you can just literally cut it out and remove it later on. So an example might be a company that specializes in things like toiletries. Is that the right word? Maybe I'm going wrong.
Yeah, toiletries. Yeah.
Yeah, but high end and really, really good quality. And I actually use them myself. And they added a quiz to their website. Just so you could add it was kind of a fun experience. You could go through and say, I like this, I like that, I like this. And it was a great way of then providing information they could use to personalize the things that we're showing you. But that quiz itself was just done using a headless front end, using our APIs and so on like that, while the rest of the site continued to use its existing technology. If they decided they didn't like that experience or didn't think it added value, they didn't like the operational side of it, maybe working with it, they could just remove it, just put a redirect to the homepage or whatever. And yeah, so it's a way. So if you're very cautious and you want to just dip your toe in the water, that can be a way of doing it. So to answer your question, it does depend on what you're trying to achieve, but I have seen that the gradual approach, the faster ROI, the faster time to get it live, there's just less of an appetite in the market right now for these bigger projects. So typically I am seeing easily the majority and maybe a significant majority going with that kind of gradual approach these days.
Makes a ton of sense. And James, as we look to wrap up, obviously you're an expert. If people want to get in touch to have a jam session with you, how can they reach out to you?
Yeah, I love that. Well, I think so. I'll just give up my email address, I guess. It's just james.semple@salesforce.com. I'm on LinkedIn. You can reach out to me there. Lots of people seem to. Really, really happy to do that. Please do reach out. We're always happy to chat. I know people look at Salesforce and see we're a big company, but we deal with lots of companies across all kinds of sizes and all kinds of different kinds of industries. I'm a global evangelist, so I do work around the world and I've worked in loads of different countries around the world. So reach out, always happy to talk to people and we're happy to help.
Amazing. Thanks so much for your time, James. This is an amazing episode.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
The Ecommerce Toolbox Expert Perspectives is brought to you by Noibu. To find out more about Noibu and how we can help you debug your e-commerce site and rocket your revenue, visit www.noibu.com. That's Noibu.com. And then make sure to search for the Ecommerce Toolbox Expert Perspectives on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found, and click subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Noibu, thanks for listening.